Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome to my Basics in Chess series. Today again with this middle game strategy, and as I told you, the middle game strategy is too tough one to handle. So there are many strategical ideas, and they are so important in a chess game that you simply have to learn them, and you have to apply them if you recognize them in a game. So yesterday I was watching this game against from David Navara with the white pieces against Boris Gelfand in the 43rd Chess Olympiad in Batumi, and I recognized this middle game pattern, and this was this sort of a isolated pawn pattern here that I've already prepared for you. And let's remind us again. I'm always trying to always realize what are the possible opponent weaknesses in a position. So let's remind us of them. So we have here, of course, the lack of development, the endangered king after castling, the lack of space, and the king in the center by the opponent, and the weak pawn and the weak square. So let's see now this position by David Navara and Boris Gelfand. You see there is no endangered king after castling. So far there's of course no king in the center. There is no lack of development by Boris Gelfand, but he has a weak pawn. And not that it's only a weak pawn, it's an isolated pawn, and it's it's a new structure that I wanted to show you how we should play against such systems. So what is black trying to do here, and what is white what will white try to do here? So when you have an isolated pawn, there are this principle of this game. So the player with the isolated pawn, he will try to advance somehow the isolated pawn. So basically he was gonna try here to play maybe d4, and of course he will try to occupy maybe the squares that are supported by this isolated pawn. And the player that doesn't have an isolated pawn, so he will create a blockade, and he will try to go faster into an endgame, because in an endgame he will be better if the opponent has this isolated pawn. So let's see here this position. You see Gelfand yesterday in this match game. I will show you the link of this video. I've already explained the whole game, but today I wanted to show you this middle game strategy, and it's an important one for you to memorize if you get in sort of a game with an isolated pawn. So you see Gelfand has now this isolated pawn on d4, d5, pardon me, and what he's trying to do with this isolated pawn, he will love to play this pawn on maybe and advance it on d4. And Navarra is simply playing with this blockade against this pawn. And of course also what black would try to do here is maybe occupy somehow with some pieces the c4 or the e4 square to somehow open some the position in the center, and create a new position, and don't go into an endgame with this isolated pawn. And in the game, Navarra finds this very nice blocking system, and you see he has this only idea here, and it's an easy one to remember against an isolated pawn, to create a blockade. And I think you have played many of games in this situations, and of course then you should go simply and play it on the blockade. So here prepared for you a possible endgame if you play maybe an isolated pawn endgame. You see in this isolated endgame, white of course would be better here. So this could be a position maybe 20 or 30 moves after this one that I've started the video. So we have maybe b4, king to g7, we have king to c2, and here of course white goes for this isolated pawn and creates here a situation which 2-on-1 with his pawns, and will simply deflect the king from the defense of promoting, and go with this king here simply and go after this pawn, while the black king would be simply here stuck and would be deflected of course of these two pawns. So you see in a potential endgame, of course the player with the black pieces would be in a losing game, and that's of course your idea here. Your idea is simply to try to go into an endgame. So here in this position, you see, just imagine this position, and it could, after 20 or 30 moves, it could go into an endgame with this isolated pawn by black. So I wanted to see now simply these moves by Navarra. They were all blocking systems against this advanced pawn, and against this advanced isolated pawn. So I just want you to realize his moves. So we have here knight on d4, again blocking out this d5, simply create a blockade, and of course you don't mind any piece trade because you want to go in an endgame. So we have now here bishop to d7 and g4. Bishop to c6. You see we don't move any of these pieces, this rook and this queen and this knight. We don't move because we created the blockade system here with these three pieces. So we have here now king to b1 and knight on d7, h4, and knight on c5. You see, again, we don't mind even this bishop to be traded for the knight because we just want to have this blockade. And again, after h5 we have a5, a4, and now queen to b6, h takes on g6, h takes on g6, g5, and you see now black takes with the knight on b3, and now of course many players would take here now with the knight on b3, and of course that's not what we want to do. We created a blockade and we want to take c takes b3. Again, we are stacking onto this, and we're playing against this weak pawn with this blockade. Again, in a potential endgame, white would be better because this pawn would be a target. So we have now here after a couple of piece trades, and now we play simply onto this d5. So although Gelfand got out of this game, but he lost with a really tough blunder. You see, that's the strategical idea to play against an isolated pawn, and I've already explained it in my video while analyzing this whole game, and of course, as I'm repeating, this link to this video will be in the description below. But you see, there is no complicating here by white. He plays simply the blockade, and he plays simply for the trade of pieces. Nothing special, nothing fancy. He plays simply for the win, and by really easy planning. So today I wanted to show you a game. It was played well by this legendary two players, Garry Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov. And the funny thing, here's Anatoly Karpov with white pieces, and Garry Kasparov is with the black pieces. And they were considered, so Anatoly Karpov was considered to be one of the best positional players, and of course Garry Kasparov was considered to be one of the best tactical players. And the funny thing is that well, Kasparov in this game showed a lecture in positional play to Anatoly Karpov, and he plays on this simple strategical idea to create by a pawn sacrifice the blockades, the isolated pawn situation. So you see, he sacrificed the pawn to create a weakness of an isolated pawn and then play onto it. So this was really something, and I think it's a famous game. Maybe you have already seen it, but let me show you what's all about. So Garry Kasparov with the black pieces, we have e4 here, c5, knight on f3, e6. So we have the Sicilian defense, the French defense, and the Sicilian defense French variation. We have now c takes on d4, knight takes on d4, knight on c6, and knight on b5. Of course, targeting here this d6. Of course, Garry Kasparov plays d6 and c4. So we have here sort of a, well, it's called the Taimanov system, and we have sort of here similar to the Moroxi-bind, a space advantage by Karpov here. So he goes positionally into the game. He wants to somehow slowly expand in the center, and here Kasparov plays knight on f6. And after knight on c3, well, this is now this moment we have a6, knight on a3, and he kicked out this knight out of the game, and he finds now this blockade system. He plays simply this move d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, and now of course we cannot take, but now after knight on b4 we created the situation of the isolated pawn. We sacrifice the pawn to create the weakness to get your opponent this isolated pawn. And this was really a nice positional play by Garry Kasparov, very fast, opened the center, and here's where Karpov played bishop to e2. And again, I'm reminding you how to play against this isolated pawn. So of course you see white would love to here to advance somehow, maybe this pawn here on d6. He would love to do that, so he's trying to advance it or open somehow in the center. And what Garry Kasparov will try to do here, try here to block out this isolated pawn. So you see, he created a weakness and simply plays onto that. So we have now here, after bishop to e2, bishop to c5, it's more active than to play simply bishop to d6, because the bishop is aiming here this f2, and of course the d6 cannot be played because the bishop and the queen are preventing it to do that. So we have now castling, of course, bishop to f3, and this is now Karpov's play. He simply relies onto the defense here of this d5, although Kasparov could have taken it after a couple of moves. He simply doesn't want to. He doesn't want to lose a tempo to take it out, and he simply plays against this blockade system. Now he plays bishop to f5, which is perfectly fine, developing, and we have now bishop to g5, rook to e8. Well, it gets a more centralized position. You see now all of these black pieces are perfectly developed. They're on active squares. I hope you noticed that the bishops are very good. The knight is also on an active square, so it's not hard to attack the knight here on b4, because you cannot play knight on c2. And of course, if you play maybe something like knight on b1 and a3, it's a little bit too slow here, and this would be, of course, with this Garry Kasparov style, he simply will play fast on your attack if you allow him 2 or 3 tempos. So we have now queen to d2, connecting the rooks, and we have now b5. A better continuation for white would have been maybe to play this knight on c4 and then advance the pawn maybe on d6. So this is in this strategical idea, when you have this isolated pawn, you want to advance it to create more space advantage. And here I think Karpov missed this knight on c4 and play simply this d6. And of course that now Kasparov uses and plays the move b5. So now he has sort of a space advantage on the queen side, and of course we cannot play d6 anymore, so this would be a plan for white. And we have now rook from a to d1, and we have knight on d3. And this is really a nice knight here. This knight won't get away from this square anymore, and you see it's also sort of a blockade against this d5. So you see Kasparov cut out the connection of this d5, but he's not interested to take it. He just wants to leave it and doesn't want to allow white or to advance it. So this knight on d3, a perfect move to do that. And of course the threat is maybe here to play b4 with this fork on this 2 knights. So we have now knight on b1, and this is now already a passive position by Karpov with the pawn up, but there is simply this knight goes on this starting square. This knight, they're hitting each other, these 2 knights. This is not a good position by the knights. You see, again I'm repeating, but Kasparov's knight here on d3, it's a perfectly placed one. So we have now h6, We want to get out of this pin here on this knight on f6, bishop to h4, and now we have again attacking move b4, knight on a4, of course attacking the bishop here, and here now again we play the blockade. Maybe the better move here would be the bishop aiming up this maybe sort of weak pawn on f2, but you see, when you have this isolated pawn situation, the choices for you are really easy, because you make simply this blockade and you don't rely on anything else. We have now bishop to g3, and now rook to c8. The other rook comes into the game, but it's also a very nice preventing move to go maybe here somehow with the rook into the game, and this is a really nice move by Garry Kasparov. So we have now b3 and now g5. You see, it's a fixed position now for black here. He has this again this knight, and maybe here an improvement bishop to g6 to not get this bishop attacked, and of course play somehow because we can advance now these two pawns here and try and attack, minority attack here on these two bishops that are not very placed. You see, this bishop is cut out with its own pawn, and that's what Kasparov created by sacrificing a pawn in the opening. And we have now bishop takes on d6, queen takes on d6, and again you see this queen is creating a blocking system. So we have now g3, knight on d7, and bishop to g2. It was sort of an improvement of the position, but now queen to f6, very nice, and it also gives us here possibilities to go with this other knight into the game, which will also create the control, more control on this d3 that we have already occupied, and it's on the third rank, and it's really near to the king here, this knight. And we have now a3. Of course, a5 was followed after trade of pawns. We have now again this pawn on the b4, and I hope you realize how Kasparov positionally, which is the Karpov's weapon, he really kicked him away on on his half of the board. You see that this knight is very weak here, and this knight is on the first rank, these rooks are on the first rank, the queen is blocked out, the bishop is aiming on to this d5, so the bishop doesn't have any good control on these like squares. So we have now queen to a2, queen to g6, and we have now d6. But again, you see, Kasparov isn't interested to take simply this d6. He doesn't bother it anymore, because we have this queen to knight on d7, which is already also creating a blockade system against this pawn. So I'm really repeating myself, but I want you really to memorize this thing against this isolated pawn and create a blockade against it. So this is your main idea. We have now queen to d2, king to g7, an improvement of the king, which is also important in a potential endgame. You want to have your king more central to the board. And we have now f3. Now Kasparov takes this pawn on d6, because he was the threat is here in an attack on the queen on f6 by this rook, and here Karpov takes with the pawn on g4. But you see, although we have now here again a pawn up, this is not a good position, because we have left here this f2 square very weak, and that's what Kasparov plays simply on. He plays queen check on d4 and attacking the king. Of course, you cannot go with the rook there, and we have now king to h1. So now we have knight on f6, an improvement. You see, now this knight is attacking, and again, if he takes this pawn on g4, we would simply have this f2 really nice covered here. And here's where Karpov attacked the queen. but this is really a blunder, because we have now knight on e4, which is cutting out the attack on the queen, and after taking the queen on this knight on d3, we have here this nice check. Of course, if the rook takes now, we have bishop to d3, which happened in the game. Bishop to d3, now the pin, and we have now a simply queen to e3, and after the rook takes on d3, we have here this deflection, which is simplifying the position, and after knight on b2, we have queen to f2, knight on d2, and of course this is a losing game by Karpov, because it's mate in 2. So you see this nice attack by Kasparov. He was simply playing first positional and then tactically, but I didn't want to analyze all of these tactical ideas. I just want you to realize this simply attacking idea by creating first this weakness of this isolated pawn, which is now perfectly here protected, but it's not a mobile pawn. And the funny thing is that it was a pawn sacrificed by Kasparov and created a weakness. So I hope you realize what I'm trying to say. And the video of this Navarra versus Gelfand video is right here. And of course, thanks you for watching, guys. Chess is the best.